Hello everyone, my name is Xiaoru, and tonight I'm going to talk about building command line interface applications with Node and React. And I come from China. Currently I study at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Karlsruhe, and I'm doing my bachelor's degrees. And you can find me as HexRCS on the web, and I also tweet about crash courses. And so everything started with a terminal, and back in the 60s, when using command line interfaces were basically the only way that people interacted with computers. And over the time, terminals have evolved, but we've got more screen real estate, and we can practically put more stuff onto the screen, but still the principle of the terminal remains to be only text. And this is the VT100, which is produced in 1978. And it was one of the first terminals that supported ANSI escape codes, which allowed a standardized way to do stuff like color fonts and change background color and stuff and so on. And it became very popular and also super influential that later on, when we moved on to graphical user interfaces, we still made terminal emulators based on this model, especially the famous Xterm. You may have already heard of it. And the screen size of VT100 is 80 by 24. So that is also one of the reasons that we still today, we tend to write code only 80 characters per line. And nowadays we have already got more superior graphical interfaces, but why do we still bother building command line interface apps? And as it turns out, command line interfaces are old, but they are not obsolete. And in fact, in the developer world, most good stuff are still, continues to be written only for a command line interface. And they're also super light on resources for the rendering, of course, because it's basically just a string of text. And you can actually just SSH into a server with your phone on 2G network, and while you're standing in line at a supermarket and interact with your command line application in real time. And that can happen, but not with TeamViewer. So as a matter of fact, when we get started doing making command line interfaces with Node, how do we start? And obviously, we start with hello world. And if we just save this line into a JavaScript file or TypeScript file, but you transpile it into JavaScript and run a file, we'll have hello world. One important thing to keep in mind is that this console is not the same as the console in the web in the developer tools in Chrome browsers or Firefox, because in the browser you can actually do CSS in the console log. So basically, if you want something fancy, you can do $C to start a chunk, and another %C to do another chunk, and in the end, you can supply the CSS styles as separate arguments to the console log. And this feature is not very well known. And in fact, we can do this because the DevTools is also a web page. So basically, we can do something like this. You pop up a DevTool of a DevTool of a DevTool, and you can edit stuff on the fly. And yeah, so this is Chrome. but our terminal, Xterm and stuff, they are not Chrome or not Firefox either. So how do we achieve something more interesting than black and white text or the basic stuff? So we do that by using ANSI escape code. And as I've mentioned earlier, that VT100 is the first terminal that supports this standard. And with this standard, we can control the we can use a set of special characters, character sequences to control the cursor location and also text color and background color and so on. But those stuff are super ugly if you just look at them. For example, I have here just to print out something like that in the console. So the first line means, okay, from now on, we put everything to a blue background and then use white text and both fonts. I have to look this up multiple times to get it right. So this is not the way that you do your apps. And one important thing is that in the end, you have to remember to reset the styling, because otherwise, if you quit your application and you'll notice that your console, everything even after you've exited the process, will still be in the style that you defined before. So what else can ANSI escape code do? Cursor manipulation. For example, how do we remove or overwrite something that's already printed on the screen? I mean, we're not printing it on paper, so we prefer to modify stuff. We can just move the printer head to a previous location, previous position, and just start from there. So for example, I have a simple clock and basically print out the current time every 1 second. And if we just run that function, we'll get something like this. And this is not what we want, not we normally want. Instead of pushing all this stuff above, we actually normally prefer to just rewrite the same thing and to update the same line. And you might have noticed that every line here, we never called something like /n, but each line are separated, and that is because under the hood, console log in Node basically is based on process.standardout.write with a new line in the end. So basically, if you want to do something proper, you have to always use the longer version, even longer than console log. And so this is how you actually do the update, the vanilla way. So where's my mouse? So this part actually means go back 1,000 columns, because no one will have a terminal that big. And then remove everything to the end of the line, because this is the only way to do that. And then we can print the current time. So if you run this, it will work correctly. So we're doing JavaScript or TypeScript. So there are definitely some NPM packages already in the wild that encapsulate and abstract this low-level text, right? Yes. So in the Node.js awesome list, we have a section dedicated to making command line interface apps. And what we have just talked about can actually just be easily be done with libraries like Chalk and log update. And instead of writing all those, I don't know, whatever they are, all those stuff, we can use Chalk to make the code more human readable. And with log updates, we can also log updates basically controls remembers that the cursor position and always rewrite to the same session, so to speak. And so we've got the basic stuff. And what are good CLI apps? We are not in the 80s or 90s anymore, so we have compute powers, and we also want something modern. So another thing that is that we have basically all kinds of sizes of terminals, because today we're using emulators. We can resize our window whenever we want. So our app should be responsive as well. So the columns and lines, they shouldn't be hard-coded. So for example, Jest is a testing suite, and it has the test runner command line tool, which has a watch mode. With Jest, you basically can use your keyboard to toggle different options, and all the data will be presented to you and updated in real time, and also with beautiful colors. So we have the building blocks, but layout is still very tough, as I have mentioned before, and managing multiple updates, especially when it's, for example, several progress bars are running at the same time in parallel, it's still very tough because we have to manage the cursor positions. And this is when Ink comes in. And Ink is actually a React renderer, and it allows you to use Flexbox in the terminal, which is super cool, I think. And React is not just a UI library, it's basically a paradigm. You basically write reusable components, everything is self-contained, and design views for each state. So your app is basically a huge function based on a type. Sorry, not type, based on a state. So when a state changes, your output changes. When the state remains the same, and your view doesn't change. And it's also a black box diff checker. So in order to make the updates more sufficient, it calculates the diff and only update the most necessary ones. And also, because React maintains a virtual DOM, you can bring your own renderer, and for example, React Native renders to native components, and React VR it's doing VR stuff, whatever it is, and here we can basically output to text, and yeah. So Ink also makes it very possible to structure the layout of our app with Flexbox. So instead of just counting and calculating, developing your own algorithm, how to position this stuff here or there, we can just write Flexbox properties, and everything will be structured nicely. Yeah, you also get everything with heights margins automatically. And Flexbox is just like Waterflow. Yeah, so these are the most used Flexbox properties out there. The flex direction specifies whether it's flowing horizontally or vertically, and justify content defines how your components are structured in main axis, along the main axis, and align items the other axis. So it's time that we have a closer look at Ink. So like every other React app, we import React first, then the components that we want to use in our app. So ink has some, other than the render method, which is the custom renderer from ink, we also have other handy components like text box colors, and also use input, which you can use to to listen to and intercept the keyboard inputs. So you can make basic navigations and stuff like that. And we also have third-party ink components like gradient, which will make your text in a rainbow color, and big text and ASCII are also available here for making ASCII arts. So here is a classic counterexample that everyone might have already encountered when learning React, but this is the CLI version. Yeah, basically we just define a box. So box here is similar to a div in the browser, but we're not in the browser, so we use box here. And other than supplying everything into a style, we only have partial CSS, which is Flexbox. So so there are properties exposed from the component itself. And yeah, so here the third line, which will listen to the keyboard events and fire the function, or no matter what. And yeah, so this is what it looks like when you run it. And it's just like 7 or 8 lines of code. And we have a simple example already, but how about a more complex one? So this is a sketch of a basic layout of a Wikipedia client, so to speak. We have an instant search bar on the top, then a bunch of result cards, and then a status bar. And so to mirror this, we just have all those components, instant search bar and results listing and status info bar. And remember to always render, because this is not the DOM version of React, so you don't need to append to anything, any DOM nodes. And inside the search bar, we have a text input, which are basically places you can put your text in. And to render bold text, we just use text and bold. And the result cards look like this. You can map your results to individual components with a map. And a single result card, which is which looks like this. And you can use color and to toggle the background color and the text color itself. And this is a status bar. You can also do conditional rendering in React in a JSS syntax, and everything just works like this. So this is all the stuff put together. So we can use arrow keys to control to go up and down. Yeah, and this is all together with the API calls, basically 100 lines of code. And yeah, so in March, Ink version 2 was released, and this is a version that brought us Flexbox. And since then, many projects have already employed Ink in their toolchain. Gatsby, for example, and I think Prisma also doing this. And we can actually also render MDX markdown to the terminal like this. So I think this is pretty useful when you want to make some documentation for command line interface tools. And we have even more awesome stuff with Ink, which is called Pastel. Pastel is something similar to Next.js, if you are familiar with Next.js. So basically it does is that you use your file system similar to an API to structure your application. So instead of routes in the browser, we sometimes have subcommand styled command line interface applications like Git. For example, you do Git stash, maybe clear, or stuff like that. So Git is the main command, and stash is the subcommand, and the clear is the subcommand of the others of stash. So with Pastel, we can do this easily. We just if we want to make a Git clone, just structure our files project like this, and every JavaScript file here is basically a self-contained Ink app itself, and all the for example the dash message or whatever or -m, they are passed into the component as a prop. So, but how do we actually share our code? How do we ship it to our users? We don't want our users to clone our repo and run an npm install, then use Node, or if you're using TypeScript, you have to transpile and build and stuff. They're not production ready looking, and we can fix this. So the first thing that we need to do to make our application complete is to add a shebang line onto the beginning of a entrance JavaScript file. And this line basically tells the shell that you use to run this chunk of code, run this file with whatever interpreter that is defined here. For example, it's Node here. And sometimes you might have Bash, or sometimes you might have Python. And the second step is to flag this entrance JavaScript file as executable with change mode. And this way we don't need to use Node something else to run this file. And finally, we need to specify a bin key in the package.json. And this is when, so for example, here, the awesome key corresponds to the index.js file in the disk directory. And this, when you global install this or npm link, the awesome will be put into your global path, so you don't need to go into this directory. You can just run awesome anywhere. And yeah, and npm link is when you want to make a local global install. So with this will link everything from your repository to the to the npm global install directory, and you can also publish on publish on the public npm registry. And this is all I have for you guys today, and hope you have enjoyed. Any questions? Yeah.
Are they doing grid soon in Ink as well?
Sorry?
Are they going to do grid?
I don't think Grid is available. So basically, they use the Yuga engine to CSS Flexbox engine to manage the layout. Yuga is also used in React Native. Yeah, yeah. So I don't think they have Grid yet. Yep.
I'm thinking to build some CLI application which in the end will generate some code. Do you have any suggestion of?
Generate some code.
Yeah, it's like you send some parameters and then you, let's say you can create a model out of it. So you say like, I have a name, user, and email, and then I send to my CLI and generates in the end a JS file, for example.
Uh-huh.
You showed to us some manipulations of the CLI itself, but do you have any suggestion about this guy who can make this extra work, let's say?
So I think what you need is basically some application written in JavaScript simply to transform the stuff. And the ink and everything here is basically the interface of your application. Okay. Yeah. Please.
I have a question regarding inputs. So you mentioned you have multiple like text input boxes.
Yeah.
How is focus managed? Because
the
browser
yeah, you have to for example, the input. I forgot where. So, God. Yeah. So if you have multiple input here, so you have to manage it yourself, like the state. You don't use your mouse to click, so you probably want to use input, that hook, to listen to tab key, for example, and when you hit tab key, you switch this, you toggle the states. Yeah, yeah. Please.
So, what are the applications of this CLI tool? So, for automating things with the OS or something, we use Perl or something else, but how it is really helpful in our real world?
In the real world, well, I think it's very useful if you're a developer.
So I just need some applications, for examples.
Yeah. As I mentioned, Jest, which is a JavaScript testing framework, it uses a command line interface to present to you the updates and where is the video? Have I already passed? Yeah. So this is an example, for example. And also, if you have another look at the, yes, you can see some people also made games here using ink in the terminal.
And Prisma CLI as well.